Well, thank you for moving this.
No problem.
Makes my life a lot easier. My wife is going to a conference, and I didn't realize she was leaving at noon on Thursday, which would mean I wouldn't make our normal recording time since I'd be watching the girls. And I debated the babysitter thing. I debated a bunch of different things, but none of that, none of it worked out. It's like, okay, well, I think I can make Friday work. And then I had that whole rigmarole that I caused with you. Thank you for moving it.
No worries.
So, how's life in Mike's world?
Good. Been really busy making the final push for the email course that we're doing at Asian Efficiency, but I finished editing the last video yesterday.
Oh, nice. I saw Tan had a tweet about you being a beast and getting this thing out like 8 days early or something like that. So,
Yeah, it was our goal for this quarter, so I guess technically that's about 8 days early, but not really that early. It's a lot of content on the topic of email, though. It's almost 7 hours worth of video altogether.
oh my gosh, that's hello email. Wow. So does it go through like how to write them and how to manage them and then all the big like the normal apps? Like what is this? I didn't intend for this to be a plug for Asian Efficiency's email course, but now you have my curiosity. What's in this thing?
Yeah, so basically what we did, the whole process behind this product was really, really interesting, and I learned a lot. We implemented the model from, I believe it's running lean. So it's a lean product development model where we first of all just announced that we're going to build this product on the topic of email. What are your biggest pain points with email? And people who filled out the survey we contacted to talk about their specific problems. Zach did interviews with everybody, really articulated very well where they were experiencing problems with their email. And then we built basically custom solutions. And as we were doing that, we realized that all this stuff tied together into a very comprehensive solution on the correct way to handle email, which is a huge problem. I mean, some of the research that we did identified that according to the Huffington Post last year, the average U.S. worker spends 6.3 hours per day dealing with email, which I think we've actually talked about on this podcast too. So it's identifying all of the improper habits and mindsets that we have typically towards email, recognizing all of the triggers, all of the potential pain points, all the things that we could typically get tripped up on, and then crafting systems so that those things don't happen and we can avoid those things while still maintaining the peace of mind from knowing that everything that comes in, we've got a system in place that'll handle it all.
Sounds like I need to go through this.
Yeah, actually, I thought of you a couple times when we were working on it based on our conversations, because I was working on it while we were recording those episodes, right. And you're like, yeah, I'm working with this specific thing. And I'm like, so is Tom in North Carolina.
Nice. This might be on my list of go through relatively soon. Do you have a launch date on this? Like, is it coming out soon or is you got a while on it yet?
October 11th is the official launch date. Right, and I'm comfortable giving that now because I just finished the videos. So
nice. Well, before we go too far down this, let's get through some of our follow-up. One thing I've been doing, and I just threw this on the follow-up list here, like I don't know, a couple hours ago. But I kind of want to go back to the deep work episode that we did, and you and I had this conversation about the digital versus analog calendar where I write out my day on paper and you do it digitally. And I figured out a way to do the digital thing a little bit here, Mike. And I'm pretty stoked about it, of course. But
Nice.
I wanted the digital thing to work. But what I found was from a digital standpoint, I can't do the entire day in a digital calendar. I just have to plan when are those very specific deep work sessions going to happen, and they're usually like an hour and a half to 2 hours long, and I do those usually one early morning and one sometime in the afternoon typically, but it doesn't always work out that way. But I managed to figure out that I can schedule those specific pieces digitally, and then I write out the rest of my day on paper, and then I use that digital calendar piece to basically manage reminders is the way that ends up working, where it triggers an alert on my phone and lets me know, hey, dummy, go turn off everything else and go do your deep work session now. So it works out pretty well for me to just have that little ding to jar me out of whatever it is I'm working on. Usually something distracting I shouldn't be working on. But that's it's been an interesting thing that I've been kind of excited about getting it to work finally from a digital standpoint.
Sweet. Yeah. I mean, that's the idea behind those notifications and those things is like you've put it to a productive use, but most of the time that's not usually the case. And we talk about that in the email course, and we've talked about it on this podcast before, but the default is whatever application you install on your mobile device probably has push notifications turned on, which means that it's just going to notify you as soon as anything comes in without any discretion as to whether it's important. And then you get hundreds, if not thousands of these notifications throughout your day, and they steal your attention away from the things that you should be working on. Where in your case, I really like your example where you've used the power of the notification for good, Joe.
Yes. Finally. I finally found the reason they exist. Nice. I want to know about your breakpoint thing. You were still working on, so for the listeners, Mike's been working on this process of gaining energy through very small time periods between longer deep work sessions, I guess. And this is taken from the idea of between points in tennis. Am I getting that right, Mike?
Yeah, so with the ritual, what I've come to the realization is that it's really important for me when I have these breakpoints to implement something that I kind of picked up from when we read the Ryan Holiday book, The Obstacle is the Way, where he talks about how things aren't positive or negative, they just are. And so one of the things that I've implemented is as I'm going in between these different rhythms and usually it's different places throughout my workday, I will take a moment as I am packing up, walking to my car, whatever, and just think about what just happened and then just let it go. So what happened? Did I get the videos done that I wanted to get done? If I did, mini celebration, and then on to the next thing. If I didn't get them done, don't beat myself up about it for the next 2 hours and think that I've had an unproductive day. Just kind of hit the reset button there and then get ready for the next point. Okay. And because I've played tennis, like that really resonated with me because you can, when you're playing tennis, think about an easy shot that you missed for several points after that. And it's affecting your play on the very next points. And you're missing other shots that you should be hitting because you're so focused on the one thing that you messed up on. So I noticed I was kind of doing that myself. And I tried to be more intentional about evaluating what just went on, saying, yeah, that was good. No, that wasn't. And then just letting it go. And then from there, moving on to the next thing.
I think that's interesting because something I do, and I haven't really thought about it until you started in on this breakpoint ritual that you're trying to put in place. And something I do whenever I realize that I'm just going down a rabbit trail and I realize I'm being extremely unproductive or I didn't get something done that I wanted to, I often take a look at inside of OmniFocus. I've got a perspective that shows me the completed items that I already have done. And I find it sometimes helpful to just look through that list and say, okay, here's all the things I've been getting done on my projects. It could be today. It could be yesterday. It just kind of depends on when it is that I look at it. But just looking through that list to see, here are the things that I've been accomplishing. Here are the ones that I've managed to complete. And then that helps me kind of get some energy and some motivation to keep cranking on them, I guess. I don't know if that's similar, but it's something that I use to, like, if I'm find myself going down a hole, just looking at all the things that, all the progress that I've made. Because there's some, maybe it's a pride thing, I don't know. But there's some motivating, inspiring piece that can come from seeing all of the positive work that I have recently completed. Does that make any sense at all?
Yeah, it's important to celebrate your successes, but you can't dwell on what you did in the past either.
Right.
So yeah, the completed perspective is really powerful. I actually just met a guy the other day who has been using OmniFocus for a while, and really what got him to use OmniFocus was that completed perspective.
Oh, that's interesting.
Because he liked to see the things that he actually accomplished, not the things that he planned to do or wanted to do, but the things that he actually did.
Huh, interesting. That's cool. Kind of a little bit of a follow-up from the last show that we did. with Brene Brown's book, Daring Greatly. Uh, we talked a little bit about how we're having those conversations with our kids and how we're changing a few things with them. The one piece that I had down to start trying to do is the concept of talking to my kids about you've made certain choices versus you are something. So you're a good kid, but you've made bad choices, like that concept. And that's not a new thing. It's just something I've been changing in me because I've just never thought about it. There's too many parenting methods out there, Mike. So there's a lot of that out there, but I've kind of been intentional. Well, not kind of been. I have been intentional about making that shift in my terminology, and I can't say that I've seen any drastic changes in my girls and how they respond to that. But I think your last follow up here is one that I've been doing as well with the facial expressions, and that on my end, I know that's been extremely helpful.
I have been trying to be very intentional about this. I don't have quantifiable data that I can say, yes, I've made improvement here, but I believe that I have. My gut feeling is that I have just because I've been more aware of it. And I think that awareness is really the key thing I was looking for in that particular instance. It's just recognizing those opportunities rather than just letting them float right by. So I would chalk that up as a win because I notice this even several times a day. So I consider that a successful outcome from Daring Greatly.
I know that on my end, whenever I do something like that, because it amazes me how much our kids can pick up just from facial expressions. It just blows my mind how much they can pick up just from looking at you. And I love seeing the excitement on my girls' faces whenever I see them and just give them a quick smile. Like, you would think that's not a big deal, but there's something about that that just makes their whole day. And I like being the dad who makes who makes the whole day. I like that.
Right. Yeah, me too.
So let's transition into today's book, and this is one that you picked out. So I'll let you introduce it.
All right. I feel kind of bad. I mean, whenever you say that you picked this book, you have like these very eloquent explanations and deep philosophical reasons for picking books. This one is just like, I heard this one's good. So no, I read Leaders Eat Last by Simon Sinek. Actually, I listened to it. I think it was the first book I ever got on Audible, and I really liked it. And I've been told by a couple people that Start With Why is even better. So that was my rationale for picking it. And I really liked it. And I'm sure we'll get into our ratings and things at the end, but it didn't disappoint from my perspective.
The nice thing is that this one was on my list as well. Has been for a long time. I couldn't tell you why. I just knew that it was on my list. This is something I'm trying to do, Mike. Whenever I get these ideas for books to read, I'm trying to get to a point where I'm writing down like where I heard about it and why I wrote it down, so that whenever I'm trying to determine which book comes next, I can look through some of those notes and know, okay, this is one I had an interest in because I was reading this one and I really liked that one. So let's do this one. Anyway, long story short, I'm trying to get better about that just because I don't always remember my rationale behind some. And I'm with you on, like, it doesn't have to be some waxed philosophical reason for picking a book. You can pick it just because it sounds cool. Though
Nice.
I will say that Simon started off on the wrong foot with me, though, because we still need to do this show on how to read a book. I do this book index, my own personal book index at the back of a book. And if you look at the back of Start With Why, there's no blank pages. This is the first book I've ever seen that doesn't have blank pages at the back of it. Every book has like at least one or two back there. This one has none. It's like, where am I supposed to put my index? That's where I always go. So it was not. I darn near just started writing right on top of the existing index just because I got frustrated with it.
Yeah, I didn't even think about that, but yeah, you're right. There's not a whole lot of room on the back of this
No, and
back of this book. So
it's not a big deal. It's just I was like, what? Come on, where am I supposed to do this? So anyway, before I even started reading it, I was like, a little frustrated with it just because of that. Terrible reasoning, I know.
Not terrible reasoning, but I don't know how we can avoid that in the future. So there's no systemic solution to this problem, I
No,
feel.
none whatsoever.
Well, regarding the content of the book, the very first thing he talks about at the very beginning really grabbed me. So I had a different first impression, but that's because I started at the front, not the back.
Yep. Yep. That's
Um,
that's probably the best way to do it is don't start at the end, start at the beginning. My mom used to do that. My mom used to always go to the end of a book and she'd read the last chapter and then she'd go back and read the whole thing. Like just
what?
I don't understand that. People who read fiction sometimes do this. I'm not don't jump on me over this, fiction readers, but there's a group of people that like to read the last chapter and then they go read the rest of the book. To me, that's just bonkers. I don't understand why you would ever do that. But anyway, I digress. There's a group of people who do that, and I completely think it's illogical.
Yeah, I don't understand that either. But I've heard of people doing that, so I know it's not unheard of. But yeah, I thought that he started this book really strong. In fact, there's a quote right at the beginning that I wrote down. He said, "There are only two ways to influence human behavior. You can manipulate it or you can inspire it." And then he spent quite a bit of time talking about the difference between manipulation and inspiration, which is a very important distinction from the perspective of not just finding your personal why, but really the whole book is kind of written from the perspective of if you're leading an organization or you're leading a company or a business, like this is why you want to start with your why. And so I thought that was really, really cool and just kind of set the tone right from the beginning. And there's a bunch of different manipulations that he lists here. There were 6 of them, I believe, that I'll run through real quick. And having him go through these and point out like examples, I can totally see how people use these all the time. Number 1 was price. So anything that you see on sale, like that's a price manipulation. Promotions would kind of fall into that category. Also, fear. He used a quote, which I have actually heard before, but I really liked. It said, "No one ever got fired for hiring IBM." And then number 4 was aspirations. Number 5 was peer pressure. And then number 6 was novelty or innovation. And I've been involved in different businesses long enough that I've seen these emphasized from a business perspective, particularly a marketing perspective, for a long time, and even encouraged to a certain degree. And basically what he's saying from the very beginning of the book is all of that stuff is wrong. It might help you get a sale, but it's not going to help you in the long term by getting you a fan that's actually going to be the type of customer that you want. These are all going to be transaction based, and you may get people who will buy your thing, but then they're going to be the ones who spend $50 and then you spend countless hours trying to support them and convince them that they should buy the next thing. So it's cyclical too, which is really kind of dangerous from an organizational perspective. You don't want to have to continue to work to maintain. You can't really build anything that way. You need to inspire people by, like you said, starting with the why. So I thought that was really, really cool.
Yeah, I totally agree because I used to work for a marketing company and it was a virtual company, so it was a different experience. But we always referred to it as a race to the bottom, like who can get the price the lowest and who can have the most promotions. And you would add features to certain things just to have something to talk about. And it's very hard to get loyal customers doing that. And the short-term gains are awesome. That's the manipulation side of things that we're talking about. But it's the companies who, and this is the main premise of the whole book, get your why figured out and then let that why permeate through everything you do. That's, if you want to sum up the whole book very quickly, there you go. But if you focus on the long-term mission of the company, don't let finances and everything dictate how things go. I mean, you have to pay attention to shareholders and you have to pay attention to all of that stuff to a point, but don't let that be the part that drives your end product. And this is what he's getting at, is let the why drive and inspire people to do business with you. And this is one of the things that kind of drove me a little bit batty with with the book, but I loved it at the same time. Is he praises Apple again and again and again and again and again. Like he talks about Apple a ton, and it was to the point that I had to stop and I went and I looked up. I went and looked up the copyright of when did he write this, because I really wanted to know where was everything at whenever this was, when he was writing this. Like, was Steve Jobs still around? Like, what? Anyway, it was written in 2009, so you kind of have to keep in mind where Apple was at that point. And
Hmm.
for some of us who are big into Apple stuff, you can start to see potential breakdowns in the company between the point when this book was written and now. I think you really have to read between the lines to get there, I think. But he loves talking about Apple and singing their praises. And I really wanted him to use some different examples. But anyway, what I'm getting at there is Apple does a very good job of sharing their why and their purpose as a company, and then using their why as something to inspire people to go and use their products to do something with them. And that's why a lot of us get really big into Apple products and buy a lot of them, is because we've bought in hard on their why, because their why resonates with our personal why. There's a lot of why in what I just said there, but if you can follow me, there is, we resonate with what the company's trying to do on a deeper level than just cost and product, if you can catch the difference between all of that.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, I'm an admittedly Apple fanboy, so I was completely okay with that. But I actually
Yeah.
thought that was a really good example because he talks about some of the stuff that Apple has done that really illustrates that they do start with the why. Like he mentions the iconic 1984 ad
Yep.
with the like everybody's there's like all these guys in business suits and they're all like grayed out in the background. Then you see this like woman in orange shorts and a white t-shirt like running towards the other direction with a sledgehammer, and another ad that I thought of kind of in the same vein is the one that I think Steve Jobs actually narrated it, the Here's to the Crazy Ones, which I actually, like I said, admittedly an Apple fanboy. I've got that framed and hanging on my wall right in
Right.
front of me. But yeah, they're a great example, and I guess the Steve Jobs personality is a great example of the starting with the why and not really caring about the what or the how, almost to the point where it's detrimental to a certain point. I mean, we can kind of see how the rest of the story plays out now because it's 2016 and Apple is kind of here and there the most valuable company in the world. So we can say that, yeah, this stuff kind of works, and I guess that's why I give it more credibility. If it was like I know fill in the blank with whatever the current hotness is, I guess I might have had the same reaction, but I guess I really resonated with that Apple example because I know the historical context. I know what all happened because I've been following the company for a while, but also I can see the fruit of that approach. Another another story he uses in there though, because he does use several different stories. He does mention Apple quite a bit, but I really liked the one about Sam Walton, the guy who founded Walmart,
Oh, right. Yeah, I really
and
like
how
that one.
that company, yeah, that's kind of the inverse side of the coin because he talks about how Walmart has kind of lost their why, whereas Sam Walton was getting paid $350,000 a year, which is nothing for CEO of a company that's worth that much money. And he always would come in and work on Saturdays because he wanted to do what he was asking his employees to do and work on the weekends. People would ask him, like, why don't you drive a fancy car instead of that pickup truck? And he's like, what, am I going to pull my dogs around in a Rolls Royce? Like, he just seems like a very down to earth type of guy. His whole why for developing the Walmart chain, it talks about like he wanted to bring these centers to small town America so that people didn't have to go to the city in order to earn a sustainable living, which is a really noble goal. And then he even uses the example of like whoever was in charge when he wrote the book. I don't think it was a direct successor, but it was two or three successors down the line. Like he's pulling in 6 million a year almost, so it's very clear indication that they've lost the why. And I guess really coming back to that whole idea of, start with why, there's a really clear concept that he illustrates in this book, which is really important. And that's that golden circle. And I did not put this in the the notes. I don't know why I didn't, because this is a really key concept.
Yeah, he talks about it
But
through the
if you
whole
were,
book.
yeah, and I like how he keeps elaborating on it too. Like he starts off with these 3 circles and why's in the middle, and then outside of that, the next ring out from the bullseye center is the how, and then on the outside is the what. He talks about how a lot of businesses will focus on the what, then they'll figure out the how, and then they'll figure out the why. But the successful ones are the ones that start with the why, and they work from the inside out instead of the outside in. But then he expounds on that, and he applies like a 3D model to it, and he shows that there's different things underneath it and things like that. So it's not just like reiterating the same concept over and over and over and over and over again throughout the book, which obviously he does. I mean, don't get me wrong, but he really expounds on it and he layers it, which I thought was really cool as well.
It really makes a lot of sense whenever you look at this golden circle, simply because so much of what businesses do, and I run into this all the time, building websites and finding clients. I'll talk to them, and 9 times out of 10, whenever I go in and I have a conversation with them, usually what I need to know is, if I'm going to build a website for you and you're a small business, I need to know why your business exists. Like, I need to understand what the purpose of the business is so that we can make the website resonate and feel that purpose. Like, that's a lot of what I try to do. But so many times I go in and I ask, why does your business exist? Which is, number one, a question they don't really expect from a web developer. It doesn't really come across as something you should plan for whenever you're going to meet with me. But whenever I ask that question, 9 times out of 10, they start telling me what their product is and why they think it's better than their competitors. But that doesn't tell me why the business is in existence. Like, it doesn't give me anything to run with. It's like, oh, great, you make axles for trucks.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. So why do you do that? Well, people need axles for trucks. Well, but why? But why do you do that? Like, that doesn't make sense. So it's interesting that if I come in and I simply say that I have a passion for helping people's dreams come to a reality through their websites and helping them portray that. Well, that's one way of selling myself to them. But they can rarely reciprocate that and explain to me why their business exists, because they jump to the outer ring of this golden circle and start telling me what they do, or maybe they go to the one layer in and like, how do they go about making that product? Like, what's the process of creating the alloys that go into that particular axle? Like, those types of things they're interesting, but that's not, the phrase that Simon continually repeats throughout this book is, people don't buy what you do, they buy why you do it. And that's something that, and it's very interesting. Here's another reason you should go listen to his TED Talk, because we talked about that last time. I'm a fan of TED Talks. He says, people don't buy what you do, they buy why you do it. And he's got a slight accent that I love hearing in my head whenever I say or hear that. So anyway, I got a thing for accents, I think, and that might be because I've got a y'all folks Southern twang that comes out in my voice on occasion. But anyway, long story short, I don't see, with a lot of my clients, I don't see a lot of them getting anywhere close to resonating with that center of the bullseye. They always start on the outside and try to work their way in. And people really don't buy from companies that work that way. It just seems weird whenever you run into those scenarios, or it ends up producing a lot of scandals, which is like what he's talking about with Walmart anymore, since they've gotten so far away from their why.
Yeah, I can tell you from my experience in business, like, it's really refreshing to hear his perspective on like why seeking out all of those transaction-based stuff. If you don't have the why, and people ask you, well, why do you make the truck axles? Well, people need truck axles, that, like, I've been there. I get that.
Yeah.
And that is really, really frustrating because you're constantly having to work on the next sale. And he has a quote in here that I really, really liked about repeat business. He says, there's a big difference between business and loyalty. Repeat business is when people do business with you multiple times. Loyalty is when people are willing to turn down a better product or a better price to continue doing business with you. Loyal customers often don't even bother to research the competition or entertain other options. Now, when you're talking from a business perspective, what's your ideal customer? It's that guy or that girl, that person who is not even going to look at the other things that are options because you have built up so much trust and they are such raving fans. And this is why the Apple thing really resonated with me. I mean, as we record this, current events, recently Samsung released the Galaxy Note 7 and it's been blowing up on people. Okay.
Literally.
So I've seen a lot of people who are like, ha, Samsung serves them right, but that's a great example of people who fit this. I'm just going to call it a stereotype. I don't think that's really the right word, but this description, of somebody who is loyal to the Apple brand. And it's because Apple is completely unashamed about their why. And they know that it's not going to be for everybody. There are a lot of people who buy Android phones, and he talks about this in the book, how like Apple's why doesn't resonate strongly with them. And you can apply that to any market segment you want, but because I'm a tech geek, like that's the one that I was like, yeah, you're speaking my language. I totally get that. And that's completely okay. Like I've been in the position where it's like, oh, we got to capitalize on whatever market share we can get. And this whole book was a fresh air to me because it was like, no, you don't have to do that.
Right.
You just got to find the people who are really going to resonate with your whole purpose and your whole vision. And then you just got to be focused on that. And you have to maintain integrity when it comes to that. That is more important. That's going to have a bigger impact on your bottom line than trying to become all things to all people, so that whatever you're developing, whatever you're making, whatever you're building, whatever you're serving fits a need that they have. Because just because there is a need doesn't mean that those people are going to buy your thing. At some level, I mean, it's not really commodity based, but kind of like there are enough options in our consumerism or our consumer based society that like if I didn't want this specific thing, I can go find something very similar. I can go find another smartphone that does the different things that I need it to do and buy it from a company that I'm more in tune or aligned with.
I think the smartphone analogy, it's one that makes this really easy to understand, I think, simply because there's a lot of, how do I say this? There's a lot of passion in that because there's such a personal device. But something that I think makes a lot of this a lot easier is because Apple people, us, when it comes to buying a smartphone, the question is 7 or 7 plus. That's the simple question that you're trying to answer. Whenever you don't resonate with Apple or you don't understand why you would pay a premium for a smartphone and you're going to go Android, there's a lot of options. Like there's a ton of different ways that you can get into the Android system. Do you want a Samsung? Do you want an HTC? The list can go on of all the Android devices out there. But something that I think really shows this is that, and I run into this a lot because people are always asking Apple or Android, like that question comes up a lot. And usually that question is sparked by Android users. Like I've tried to sit down and figure out when I've had somebody who's using an iPhone ask me if they should switch to Android, and I can't come up with a single time that's ever happened. But I very regularly have Android users who will try to argue with me over how their phone is just as good as mine or better than mine. But I never, ever see people who even want to start that conversation the other way around. It's almost like I run into these Android users who are trying to justify their decision for not using an Apple device, and people who are using an Apple phone don't even understand why there's a question out there. So to me, that's the ultimate of people who get into Apple devices typically have bought in hard and are extremely loyal to the company. And those who aren't, they're probably getting something weird with hand-me-down devices and such, but it seems like to me that whenever you get into it and you're really truly loyal, it's not even a question. It's not even something to discuss. It's not even something that's even worth bringing up because the decision's already made. Like it's oh, they have a new phone. Do I have an upgrade available or not? Like that's that's as far as it goes.
Right. it's really polarizing because of Apple's strong messaging around their why. You either love them or you hate them, but the people who are on their side are usually raving fans. And to be honest, like I mentioned, the Samsung Galaxy Note 7 thing, I'm not in that camp that's like, we'll take that, Samsung. Like, I think it's terrible that that's happening, and I think ultimately this is a bad thing. I think competition in the market is good. I think that having like Samsung, or I'll just say Android, because I know there's a lot of different makers that make Android phones, but Android and iOS, having those two very popular options is ultimately going to result in better products for the consumer, no matter what side that you're on. So I don't want to make it sound like we're just completely on Apple's side and everything that's not Apple is wrong. But the technology-based examples are really good for this particular book, I believe, because there's another thing that he talks about in here with the, what's he call it? He calls it the law of diffusion of innovations, that bell curve, if you remember that,
Yep.
where he talks about at the very front, 2.5% are innovators, and then 13.5% are early adopters, 34% are early majority, 34% then on the back end of this are late majority, and 16% are laggards. And this was interesting because I've always considered myself an Apple fanboy to a certain extent. But let me ask you, I guess, before I reveal mine, did you locate yourself on this bell curve?
It really depends on what you're talking about. Are you talking about computer devices, like technology, like the
Yeah, I mean, we'll just use technology as an example. So when it comes to smartphones or computers, we'll lump those together. Like, where do you fall on this?
if you give me unlimited funds, I will always be an early adopter and buy them as soon as I can. Like that's where I land, and I know that. But if you put me, and this is why I asked about the specific sector, because there are some realms, like take agriculture, which is my bread and butter. If you let me go work in that, I will fall into that innovator category because I'll help come up with the new stuff and try to use things that have never been used before. Like I'll fall into that category. But you get me into cars and new technology in cars, I'll hit that late majority to laggard level. So it really depends on the sector. I think it's going to be dependent on what specific thing we're talking about for them. But yeah, if you're talking computers
Right.
and smartphones and that type of thing, given the ability, I'll fall into that early adopter category.
Right. So you just stole my follow-up point, but that's okay. Which was that like we are all innovators and early adopters in some area. And he talks about how like he used the example of him and I think his sister maybe, where like she's an innovator when it comes to fashion and he's an innovator when it comes to technology, and he's trying to convince her that she should get a Blu-ray player and she's trying to convince him that he should get designer jeans, and the person who's trying to do the convincing is always hitting a brick wall. And I thought that was really, really
Yep.
interesting. But I also thought it was interesting because I'm looking at my behavior patterns and I'm looking at this, and I always would have thought, because I consider myself a pretty pretty technology savvy, I would think that I would tend to be on the front end of this curve like the innovators, but I think I fall actually in the early majority or early adopters section. Probably early majority though. I am, we're talking about smartphones and we're kind of dating the podcast when we do this, but as we're recording, the iPhone 7 just launched and people are talking about which ones they ordered and when they're coming and things like that. I did not get a new iPhone, and to tell you the truth, I didn't really want to get a new iPhone. If someone were to hand me one, that'd be fine, but I'm not going to go out and spend $1,000 on this thing. Mac OS Sierra was released, and I didn't even think about upgrading it because I don't want it to break the things that I use on a daily basis, like Skype. Although today, what could possibly
Yeah,
be
what
worse
fell
than
down on its face today? Hello,
Skype's not working
Skype.
anyways, so so maybe I should become more of an early adopter there. But yeah, this was really interesting to me because I kind of painted myself into a corner, and then or painted a picture of where I thought I was, and then when I thought about it, I'm like, actually, I'm not that. And then as I was thinking about the different hats that I wear, the different roles that I have, trying to identify myself regarding the different scenarios and the different things that that I'm involved in, well, it was actually a pretty cool exercise, and it brought a lot of clarity to how and why I do things the way that I do.
I think it's interesting to look at that chart, and I'll grab a picture of this and put it in the show notes. But if you look at this, to me, it's interesting that you say that you're putting yourself in the early majority category. I can see that, and a lot of times I will fall into that, but it's not because of a lack of want. Like, it's not because I don't want to. Like, okay, so let's use Mac OS Sierra coming out. I almost decided to upgrade to that this morning. Now, you have to keep in mind, I'm not even up to Yosemite right now, so I need to get upgraded soon. Anyway, I didn't because I knew we were going to be recording this podcast. However, when we're done with this podcast, I will be saving my files, running a backup, and then I will be hitting that upgrade button because I know that I don't have anything vital that needs done until about next Friday. So I have some time. If something goes wrong, I have the ability to sit around and play with it to get it up and running correctly. But given the opportunity, like, I'm not upgrading to an iPhone 7. That has nothing to do with anything other than finances currently. Like, I just don't want to spend the money on it, and I would have to buy out my current process on my current phone, and I don't want to do it. So it has more to do with finances than anything. But if you got rid of that variable, I would do it immediately. So that's how I know I'm in that early adopter category with that stuff, just because when new ones come out, I want it right now, and I want to get into there. But I know that I'm not in the innovator category and I think when it comes to these particular pieces, like what we're talking about, very few people actually fall into the innovator category just because we don't have the ability to build the hardware that does this stuff. We could do the software pieces, but the hardware is very difficult for just the average Joe off the street to just go build a new laptop to compete with Apple. Like, that just doesn't really happen.
Mm-hmm. Right. And he talks about how the best does not always win. And that's really the key takeaway with that bell curve, I believe, is he mentions that it's critical that you reach the early adopters because they are going to champion your cause to the majority.
Right.
So if you go on Twitter right now, you're going to see all sorts of stuff from the early adopters and the innovators who are upgrading to this stuff. And every time you see somebody that says, "Hey, I upgraded, and I'm able to do this. I'm able to send lasers in my messages app,"
Right.
that is one more thing that's gonna move me in the right direction towards adopting that technology. And it's really interesting to think about this from a business perspective because, like we talked about, we're all influencers about different things. And I think that sometimes we have assumptions about who the influencers are and we go after those people and they're not the correct influencers. But really, the key to your success from a business perspective is to find those influencers, get them on board, and then have them champion your cause for you, communicating, once again, starting with the why. And there's a really good example of somebody who did not communicate their why very well with TiVo.
Oh, yeah.
And I did not know the whole picture of TiVo, but I know it's been around for a long time. And I fell into that camp where I'm like, well, why do I need that? Like, what is the benefit to that? And he talks about, and I don't know, this is probably not the entire story, but it was basically set up on a silver platter for TiVo to dominate this entire industry. But they could never really articulate why the average TV watcher would need this service. And that comes back to something else that I put on the outline here, the celery test.
All right.
The celery test is for, he uses the example where everybody's got their opinions about this is what you need to do, this is what you need to buy, etc. And so he says, you ask somebody, what's the secret to business success? And like, oh, you got to buy Oreos. And somebody else is like, well, you got to buy M&Ms. And somebody else is like, no, you got to buy rice pudding and celery. And it comes back to the why. If your goal is to become healthy and fit, you're going to go to the grocery store and you're not going to buy the Oreos and the M&Ms, even though there are innovators that are pushing those who are saying, yeah, this is the thing, because it just doesn't seem right. And it's really important for so I guess tying this all back, it's really important for two things to happen. One, you have to identify the people who are really going to champion your cause. And then two, there really has to be authenticity there for why they are championing this thing. There really has to be some value that's derived from it so that it passes. Another way, I guess, to say it would be like the smell test, where when this innovator talks to an early adopter or a early majority or a late majority, that they can look at that and be like, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Okay, I'll do that. I'll go ahead and install that operating system. And I think a lot of companies never really take the time, a lot of organizations never really take the time to identify that so they can articulate it so that message is kind of like a telephone game. Unless you start with something that is authentic, you're never going to get that down the road. It's not going to become clear through translation. You have to make sure that you start with a really solidly articulated and very clear why, and then you can hope that gets translated correctly, but it's never going to become more clear as the process moves down the chain. Does that make sense?
Yeah, if you finish off the TiVo example, they, essentially what they did is they came up with this revolutionary device that allowed you to record your TV shows. We know what a TiVo is. But instead of telling us, this allows you to control your life, this is allowing you to, put things, watch things when you want to instead of just when the cable companies tell you can. Instead of telling us that, they told us that, hey, you can record shows and then you can play them back. That, instead of telling us why it existed, they told us what it did. I think a good parallel to this is, and I don't think this is an example from this particular book, but when Apple came out with, let's throw more Apple examples out here. When Apple came out with the iPod, they didn't tell us, it has a such and such size hard drive and here's how it plays and here's how you hit back and forward. Like, it didn't tell us all of that. They said, you can keep 1,000 songs in your pocket. You can take your music with you. You're the type of person that wants to listen to music whenever and wherever you want. This will do it for you. That's what they told us. They told us why this thing existed instead of telling us, hey, you can put, this many gigabytes worth of song, or maybe it was megabytes. I don't even remember. But, whatever that size was. But, there's a very big contrast between those two approaches. Well, we all know how big the iPod was, and it's pretty obvious that TiVo didn't dominate the market like they should have. And it's primarily because of the way that they marketed it to us. And Simon Sinek does a pretty good job of explaining that in a couple scenarios. I can't even place where it's at right now, Mike. I tried to find it, but couldn't do it. But he gave a couple examples of explaining the differences in marketing tactics that people use or that companies use, where they'll say, this is how big the hard drive is. This is the speed of its processor. Like, they would give us all these stats on it. And then they would say, do you want to buy it? Well, if you come at it the other way around, and take, say, the Apple approach where, we have a passion for design. We want to bring computing power to the everyday man. And by the way, we have a computer that has this much hard drive and this much RAM. Like, you come at it from a different perspective where you start out with the inner, start out with the bullseye of that golden circle with your why. Even in your marketing, let's talk about why our company and why we exist. Let's talk about that first. And then we'll talk about how we go about making it, and then we'll talk about what it is. I mean, look at Apple's launch events whenever they introduce a new product. They always start out with some of the purpose behind a product, and then they go through the process of how they made it, and then they'll tell you what that will do, which is just fascinating that, and I don't even know if they intend to do it that way or if they've just, figured it out through trial and error, but, they follow that golden circle perfectly in almost every piece of marketing that they ever do. And that might be why so many of us are such huge fans of them anymore, is they've hit us at the core, Mike.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought up the launch events, because I heard a statistic just this week that the iPhone 7 launch event, this was a statistic cited by the company that built the streaming infrastructure that was used to broadcast the event. They said that more people tuned in to watch the iPhone 7 launch event than at any point during the Olympics this year.
Oh my gosh.
And that's because, like, not total viewers, obviously, for the Olympics, but at any given point during the Olympics, The total number of viewers at that given point was less than the number of people who tuned in to watch the iPhone 7 launch event. And it's because the goal is not to build a company. It is to, in Simon Sinek's words, to build a megaphone. He talks about how most companies have logos, but few have been able to convert those logos into meaningful symbols. And that is definitely something that Apple has been able to do.
Or Harley. He talked about Harley Davidson quite a bit and the passion that people have for those motorcycles, despite the growing group of people who hate them. There's always a battle back and forth. But yeah, welcome to iOS and Android fights. The Harley Davidson logo is one of the few in existence that people will tattoo on their bodies. People love them that much that they'll put a corporate logo on their chest. It's just what people love them that much, and very few companies ever, can even imagine reaching that level of loyalty.
Yeah, exactly, and that's because their goal is a little bit skewed. He has another line in here where he talks about how money is never a cause, it is always a result. And how many times have you heard from different companies or organizations that you've worked with, we got to keep an eye on the bottom line? What Simon Sinek is saying is that no, you don't. You need to keep an eye on your vision and your why, and the score will take care of itself. And I thought that was really cool. He also mentioned that what gets measured gets done. And that really challenged me because from an organizational perspective, what are the marketing term I know, but key performance indicators? What are the things that really determine
You're going to bring up
success?
KPIs. Come on, Mike.
Sorry, but I'm thinking about this not just from an organization, or I guess not from a business perspective, but like even from a ministry perspective. Like I'm the men's minister at our church. What are the things that contribute to a successful ministry? And you can apply this to anything. What are the key things that determine whether your family is successful? You can apply this to any area of life, but you do need to make sure that you are measuring the correct things, and then you have to measure those. If you don't measure those specific things, then those things are not going to get done. Maybe for your family, it's quality time. So it's the number of days that you spend going to, I don't know, field trips, the number of vacation days that you spend. I say field trips because we homeschool our kids, so when I take a vacation day, it's usually to go to the children's museum or something with my family. But those are the things that really build strength in our family. It's that quality time that I spend with my wife and with my kids. So that's something that I want to measure. And if I haven't gone on a field trip so far this year, like I want to know that, because that means that thing is overdue. And if I neglect that for too long, then the organization, in this case, the family organization, is going to suffer because of that.
I think that makes a lot of sense. If you don't understand why you're doing something, why do it at all? Like, this is funny. You want to take it to a really low
Exactly.
You want to go to a really low level here. Earlier today, so my wife is gone for the weekend. She's at a women's retreat. Kudos to her. I really wanted her to get some time to just go and relax and enjoy a nice little relaxing weekend. I wanted her to get some of that. Anyway, I looked at my oldest and I realized she had her arms full of toys. Like she just was loaded up with tons of toys. And I asked her if she was playing with all of the toys, and she looked at me and said, "No." What? You have like 15 toys under your arms. Like you're loaded up. And I realized that our youngest was running around, didn't really look like she knew what to do. And that made me realize, Emma is holding on to all of these toys because she doesn't want Rose to play with them. So I looked at Emma and was like, okay, why are you holding on to all those toys? She's like, I don't know. It's like, well, if you don't know why you're holding on to all these things, why don't you put them down? That's a good point. And then she went and she put all the toys down. And only when she put the toys down did she realize why she was still holding on to them. And then she started trying to gather them again. Anyway, it was interesting to me that even at that level, the simple question of why are you holding on to all this stuff, even in a 3-year-old, triggered the idea that I don't know why I'm doing this. I'm going to stop doing this. And if a 3-year-old can figure that out, you would think billion-dollar companies could figure that out. That, we have all these things. It's I don't even remember the book now, sunk cost bias that we talked about, where you invest a lot into a specific thing or a product, and it's hard to kill it because you've got so much invested in it. Well, there's a lot of that to be said with the why as well, because if you don't understand why you're holding on to something, why do you still have it? Like, get rid of it. Let's go to minimalism. Why if you don't know why it's in your life, if it doesn't have an exact purpose that happens repeatedly and frequently, get rid of it. Don't hold on to things just because you think you should. That's a terrible reason to keep doing things. So I think there's a lot of value just in seeing and applying the purpose and a mission and a vision to a lot of different areas, not just in business, even though it's obvious this is a primarily business and leadership book, but I think there's a lot of truth that can come out of it down to even a lower level, even to raising kids when they're playing with toys.
Yep, absolutely. Because it's one thing even to know the why yourself, but then you have to be able to communicate that to other people. You have to be able to give that vision or that why to everybody else that you work with or serve with or are in the organization with you. And he talks about how that is the most difficult thing that you can do. He says that where is it? I think he said in the book, I didn't write this part down, but I think he said that successful succession is like the most difficult thing for a business. And this is the part I did write down. He says, successful succession is more than selecting someone with an appropriate skill set. It's about finding someone who is in lockstep with the original cause around which the company was founded. And he uses a bunch of examples. We mentioned the Walmart example already, which really just solidified it for me, like how important that stuff really was. Like, you have to get the right people on the bus, so to speak. People really have to be on board with the why. And if they're not on board with the why, that's okay, but it's not the right fit. And coming back to the business side of it, it's not just the people that you work with. It's not just the people who are in the organization with you. It's the people that you're trying to sell to. And he has a quote at the very end of the book, which I absolutely loved. He said, "Are we better than our competition? If you believe what we believe and you believe the things we can do can help you, then we're better. And if you don't believe what we believe and you don't believe the things we can do will help you, then we're not better. Our goal is to find customers who believe what we believe and to work together so that we can all succeed." And through all the different stories and things that he talks about, and this is kind of getting to your last point there, I guess, the achievement versus success. Like, true success comes when there is synergy throughout the entire organization or the entire team. And that has to be from the top down. You can't just believe the why like Sam Walton did. You have to be able to communicate that, and you have to be able to pass what he calls the school bus test, which is where if the leader of the organization were to get hit by a school bus tomorrow, is the why clearly articulated enough that everybody else in the organization would be able to pick it up and run with it? And Walmart is an example of that not happening. I would argue that Apple is actually a pretty good example of that happening. I know people will say, well, it's not Steve Jobs' Apple anymore, but I think for the most part, Tim Cook has been around long enough that he's done a very, very good job maintaining that why throughout the company. He does things a little bit different. He famously released the Apple Pencil, where Steve Jobs has said, like, you don't need a stylus. We'll never make a stylus, things like that. But he's connected to the why, and that's actually, now that I bring that point up, that's a really good example of people who are viewing this from an inside-out perspective versus an outside-in perspective. The people who will say, well, oh, see, Tim Cook is not doing the same things that Steve Jobs would have done. They're focusing on the what and the how. And they're focusing on what Steve Jobs said. He said, well, you don't need a stylus. The perfect stylus is at the end of your hand. Okay, but it doesn't bother Tim Cook and the rest of Apple that Steve Jobs once said that, because they're looking from the inside out. They're starting with the why, and they're asking themselves at this point today, like, what is the vision? What would Steve Jobs do in this particular instance, so to speak? Although I don't think they frame it that way, but it's more, what would the Apple that Steve Jobs created do? What would the Apple that we've all bought into and we've developed over the years, what would they do? And the answer is develop a really awesome stylus to go with this iPad Pro that we released. And they're okay with that. I think I've been in situations though where it's like, oh, well, we once said this thing, so we can't go back on our word. That's the wrong way to view it. That's looking at it from the wrong perspective, the wrong direction. And that can end up, I mean, it's a stylus. Who cares? Like, that's not going to make or break the company. But there are situations that I can think of in my own life, which I don't really want to share on the podcast here. But like, we've said, oh, we did this thing 6 years ago, so we can't possibly pivot and change directions now because we're focused on the what.
See, I think the Apple Pencil thing there is a good example, because so much of what they've done and what they've said in the past, it comes through in something like the pencil. Like, it comes through in something like a stylus, because they're trying so much to do this whole rebellious concept of helping the everyman in competing with, say, the corporations of the world. And whenever you have something like a stylus, you're able to write and draw and create in ways that can rival what those big companies do. And that's so much of what Apple tries to do, is make really complex and really sophisticated and complicated processes like video and audio editing, and in my case, a lot of development. They're pretty good at making a lot of that feasible from just about anybody that can pick up the devices. And there's a lot of that is easier done with something like a stylus. So I think there's a lot of value in them doing something like that. And it's because they understand the why of what they do, and they understand how to build something that garners a close relationship with the people who are going to be using it. There's a lot of loyalty that comes from the people who use their products. So something like a stylus can help that come about. It can help people use the device in a better way. And, honestly, it's, I think your last point here is trust is not a checklist. I think there's truth in that, because so many companies and so many, at least the corporations I've worked with, Mike, both as clients and just working for them as an employee, they so often want to build loyalty. They'll put together these graphs and the funnels that you'll see on these big presentations of how do we take people from a first-time buyer to a loyal, forever customer. And they want to they literally create these checklists of, here are the things and here are the steps we need to take these people through in order to get them to a loyal and trusting customer. And that's not the point. Like, that's not why.
Right.
Like, you have to understand the vision of why the company exists, and then let that come through, and then people will buy into that. Even if it's just the early adopters, then they'll become your spokespeople. This is repetitive at this point, but you have to come at it from the standpoint of, here's why we exist as a company, and this is what we do, and this is how we get this what in existence. So I think that people so often try to say, here are the steps you go through in order to succeed and to build that trust. It doesn't work that way. That's not, you miss the point if that's what you're trying to do.
Exactly. You cannot just do XYZ and then get trust. He says, trust begins to emerge when we have a sense that another person or organization is driven by things other than their own self-gain. And when you meet a company or a client, I mean, I guess a relationship could work either way, and they're willing to change their business model in order to work with you, that is not going to facilitate trust. That may facilitate a transaction, which is going to provide a temporary short-term gain, but it's going to provide a long-term loss as you have to rejigger your whole business model to figure out, how do I actually sustain this? So just being upfront, saying like, yeah, we may not be the best fit, but this is what we believe, and if you agree, then come on board. We'll work together and we'll build you something awesome. That builds trust, even with people who don't resonate, I think, with what specifically your why is. But the people who really do resonate with that, that's where the trust comes. And with that trust comes a sense of value. In fact, he actually says that value is the transference of trust. But trust is not something that you can manufacture. And that's the whole point behind trust is not a checklist. You can't just do all the steps and then all of a sudden you have trust. Trust is kind of a hands-off thing where obviously the things that you do will or will not build trust, but you just do your part basically, and then it's up to the individual and how they respond to your why to manufacture that trust or not. And you have to be okay with there's a bunch of people that are not going to trust us, and that's okay. There are a lot of people that don't trust Apple, that absolutely hate Apple, and vice versa. But if you can create those raving fans, those innovators who will go to bat for you, then that will provide the success. And like I said, that's not just a company or a business perspective. That's everything. I mean, that's what I really liked about this book is this is a leadership book. Leadership can look a lot of different ways. Leadership could be leading your family. It could be leading an organization. It could be leading a business. It could be leading a ministry. It could be leading a community service team. Fill in the blank for your sphere of influence. But the principles that are in this book, I think, are transformational because a lot of people view leadership as, well, I have authority and I'm going to tell you to do something and you're just going to do what I say. But really, like bringing this all the way back, you can't just manipulate people that way through power or through even incentivization. You have to inspire people. And if you can't figure out how to inspire people, then any sort of leadership position you have is going to be short-lived.
Just to clarify what you just said, like you can get people to do what you want through manipulation. Let's not discount that. Like you can in the short term, you can pull that off, but you won't build
Correct.
a bigger, longer term business through those methods without destroying your business itself. Just
exactly. And a great example of this, I guess, would be the family perspective. Like we both have young kids.
Yes.
Right now, we can tell our kids, you have to go to bed by 9:00.
Yes.
Okay. But when they get to be 16, 17, 18, they're still under our roof. It's easy to try to play the power card. Well, you're under my roof. You obey my rules. It's not going to work though. And all that's going to do is it's going to produce this long-term resentment instead of inspiring our kids to live right and to make healthy choices. We're going to just basically build up this resentment until they finally get freedom. And those are the people that they go to college and they drink and they party and they flunk out of school because, I finally have this freedom. That's not what I want. So this book really hit home for me because I feel like these are principles that I really have to solidify. I'll just use the family example. Like in my family right now, because my kids are impressionable right now. And if I don't get this stuff down, like I'm going to get a harvest in 6, 8, 10 years, and it's either going to be good or bad based on what I do right now. So I really want to make sure that I nail this.
Absolutely. And I know that for me, one of the things, I'm going to transition here into action items, but one of the things that really struck me on this was that so much of what I do in web development, like whenever I meet with clients and I build websites for them, that is something that I am very good about stating, here's why I'm here, here's why I'm helpful to you. If that doesn't resonate with you, we need to split ways. And I'm very good at it from that standpoint. The place I tend to fall down with knowing why I do things, and it's not that I don't know why, it's more that I have a feeling of my purpose behind my online business. So why do I write the blog? Why do I write scripts that I give away? Why are we doing this podcast? Like there's a lot of these things that I do online, both in written words, spoken words, and then video in some form. It all involves words in some way, and it just depends on the medium you want to share them. The question is, why do I do that? I could tell you, like, if we sat down and talked about it for about 15 minutes, I could explain it to you, but I've never taken the time to boil that down to say, here's exactly why I run this whole thing, and here's my purpose behind it. Like, I could get there eventually, but I've never boiled it down to define it specifically. you get the difference between between those two. That's kind of a nebulous thing there. But that's
Yeah,
that's what I want to try to do is get it boiled down to where I can state it clearly and succinctly.
yeah, exactly. And I guess I didn't actually put down an action item because as I was going through this, I saw all the different places that this applied to my life, and I felt like I was kind of drinking from the fire hose, honestly, in terms of this book. Um, and so, but my action item, I'll just say, is to do the exact same thing, just like reevaluate everything that I can easily now sit down and identify all the things that I say I'm going to do or I want to do. For example, I'm going to journal every night and I'm going to read my Bible and pray every day. Like those are things that are built into my current routines. And there are certain things that we make our kids do, but I want to just basically take everything, all the different areas of my life where I have those things. Like I know the what, and I want to actually just deconstruct all of those things and say, okay, what is the why behind this? Like basically what you're saying with your business. I just was really impacted by this book, and I realized that this has far-reaching effects throughout a lot of different arenas. And so this is not probably going to be something that we'll be able to completely follow up on next time. But I want to start from ground zero. I want to identify why for everything that we do. Why do we parent the way that we do? Why do I work the way that I do? Why do I lead the ministry the way that I do? And then if there's anything that's out of alignment there, it's got to be fixed. But that's a pretty big project. That's definitely going into OmniFocus.
So I have a whole bunch of questions for you for next time now.
Yep.
There we go. What'd you think of Simon's writing style?
I really liked the writing style. One thing I did not like was he capitalized every instance, I think, of what, why, and how, which I get why he did that.
Yes.
Like it really makes the terms pop off the page, but that got a little old. That's not the stuff that really resonated with me. It was more the illustrations and the examples when he was getting into the explanations behind the points that he was trying to make with that type of stuff. That's the only thing really that I didn't like about it, though. I really liked his writing style. I really like his examples. I thought that his interpretation of events and things was spot on. I know you mentioned like it's Apple, Apple, Apple. There are a lot of different examples there. It's kind of obvious that he's a technology guy with an Apple bias as well. But I thought that everything that he said was not viewed through like rose-colored glasses, so to speak. It was an accurate interpretation of the events at the time that he was writing the book. So I really liked it, and I would give it a 4.5.
A 4.5. So from my standpoint, I've said it a couple times now. I got tired of that Apple constant, which is fine. Again, I'm a big Apple fan, so I'm good with that. My only thing was it just seemed like there were a couple places where he could have broke the monotony a little bit and gone a different route. And that meant that to me it was a bit repetitive, and there were a lot of cases where, and I just noticed this because I write a lot, and you write a lot too, but you do that enough and you can start to notice things within certain paragraphs where it's like, okay, so that sentence that you wrote there is almost identical to the one a couple paragraphs before, and it says the same thing. So why'd you say it again? Like there was a lot of that I ran across, and it just kind of got to be annoying to me. So that's why I say a bit repetitive. That's a personal preference. That's not something that I think most people would pick out. So that's just me. So anyway, all of that to say, I ended up rating this one a 4.0. Coming up next, the ones that I have, the one I picked out that come up next is The Innovator's Dilemma by Clayton M. Christensen. And if I read correctly, he is a professor at, is it Harvard? I think that's where he's a professor. I probably got that wrong. Anyway, that's one I've had on my list for a while, and I'm excited about that. What'd you pick for following up to that one?
Well, I saw this on the list, and this has actually been something on my list as well. That is the Productivity Project by Chris Bailey. Chris Bailey was actually on the Productivity Show and I believe that his book might actually be featured in the dojo right now.
Oh, nice.
But yeah, so it's been something that when he was on the podcast, he was talking about the process that he was going through at the time of writing the book. So yeah, I'm interested to see the end result of that, and I've heard a lot of good things about the book as well. So
Cool. Yeah, I like our list of books. Mine grows a lot. I've got my own personal one that I maintain, and then there's the one that you and I share, and I'm sure you've got one separate from that as well. So book lists, yeah, they grow faster than you check them off. It's just the way it goes. However, dear listener, if you're listening to this and you have a specific book that you'd like to hear us go through, there is a way to recommend a book to us. If you go out to the Bookworm site, bookworm.fm, you'll find a link out there. You can click on the recommend button, fill out the form. We'll get that recommendation. In the same area, you'll also find a book list that lists all the ones that we've already gone through, as well as the ones that are coming up and those that have been recommended to us. So there is a way to see all of those, so you can get a feel for the type of books and the different scenarios that we like to talk through. You can get all of those out there at the Bookworm site.
And I did see that some of those have made it onto the list, so we're going to be tackling some of those recommendations here.
Yeah, some of those recommendations made it onto the planned list, and there's one that's coming up very quickly that I got in the mail here recently, and it's much longer than I was expecting with very small type, and it'll take a while to read that one.
The other thing that you can do, and we would really appreciate this, is if you enjoy the show, go over to iTunes and leave us a review, because the way that iTunes features podcasts, it takes into account and weights those reviews very heavily. So by leaving a review, you're helping other people find the show. So we would really appreciate if you would take a few moments and do that.
And just to kind of tease some things, Mike and I have a couple little fun versions of episodes that we're going to deviate a little bit from the reading a book concept here very soon. So just kind of stay tuned. We've got some interesting things we're doing. We'd like to continue growing out the Bookworm process. So those things are coming up. So stay tuned, and those will be out quick, it seems. So we're pretty excited about that. But until then, we have The Innovator's Dilemma coming up. So if you're reading along with us, you can pick that one up and get ready to go through that one in a couple of weeks. So we appreciate you tuning in to listen to us, and we will talk to you next time.